You're listening to Compliance Bites with VetSnap, hosted by resident compliance pros Courtney and Cass, where we're covering bite-sized DEA compliance topics perfect for your snack break. Let's take a bite out of compliance and check out today's episode. Welcome, everybody, to Compliance Bites with VetSnap, where we are covering bite-sized compliance topics in the time that it takes you to grab a snack from your break room. My name's Courtney, and I am joined here by Cass. Cass, it's always wonderful to have you with me. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Courtney. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
And me too. Today we are going to be covering everything about PMP and kind of talking a little bit more about it.
And hopefully you guys are getting to actually sit down and take a break and eat some food, because we all know how that goes.
So, Kaz, let's start out and tell me, what is PMP? What does PMP even stand for? Let's start there.
Yeah, so PMP is the Prescription Monitoring Program, or sometimes people call it the PDMP, so Prescription Drug Monitoring Program. It means the same thing. Essentially, in a nutshell, what it is it's some sort of oversight into looking into where exactly controlled substances are ending up, what's their end user, and how often that's happening. Because once you have the drugs and then you send them out with your clients or your patients, you have to kind of have an end user, right? Where did they end up going? So essentially what it does is just acts as a tracking system and basically an overhaul of where everything's ending up so that they can understand what's happening with our controlled substances in our nation.
And now you keep saying end user. So are we talking about Fluffy, Spot, Bella, Luna? Who is the end user that we're actually looking into?
So yes, while in vet medicine, it goes to our patients, right? Our dogs, our cats, whatever it might be. But the end users are clients. So they want to know who's the human who now physically has that controlled substance after it's left your practice.
Perfect. And yeah, PMP always started in that human med side. So it really was something that kind of just spilled over into our veterinary world. And we're needing to, again, kind of help out with that tracking, with those data management to make sure, again, yep, it's never going to be Fluffy that's abusing that medication, but might be John Doe. So have to make sure that we are tracking everything properly. What specific drugs are getting tracked by PMPs, Cass?
So it varies by state. It's state dependent on that, but it's your common ones, right? It's any of those opioids that you're sending out. It's any of those hydrocodone cough syrups, tramadols. In some states, it's gabapentin. So it varies based state by state, but anything, if you're ordering controlled substances or any controlled drug of any kind, and you're seeing on the bottle that it says the big letter C and then it has numbers with it, that's the class of controlled substance. So there's schedules, right? So if it has a 2, it's a Schedule 2 controlled substance. You can always find that on those bottles and make sure that you're paying attention to that, because what's controlled, in your doctor friend states over might not be controlled in your state, or vice versa.
And so it'll mainly be those ones that are going out the door. We don't really have to worry as much about things that maybe I'm using in surgery, like my anesthetic drugs. Not going to be the ones that I'm really having to record as often, correct?
Correct. Yep. So PMP only cares about what you're dispensing out of your facility. So that end user, like we talked about there at the beginning of this. So anything that you're using to sedate your cats, your dogs, your horses, whatever it might be in practice, still have a requirement to, have a controlled logbook for that. Totally different talk. But as far as reporting and knowing where drugs are going, it's when you're dispensing those medications.
Right. And I know there can be some weird cases where sometimes that can overlap a little bit. So I know yes. GABA is one that's kind of falling in and out, just depending on which state you're in, if it needs to be reported to the state. And I know that's one that, like, all the spicy kitties in our practice, we would use that to be able to pre-med them for our surgery. Yes. Or sometimes even like oral bupe. You're normally, yes. We might be using it, in hospital, but sometimes you're sending it out the door. So sometimes we can have a little bit of a gray area, right?
Yep, absolutely. I run into that at my facility where it's injectable buprenorphine that you're also sometimes sending home as oral pain medication. So it's both, right? We're using it in hospital and we're sending it out the door. And we got to make sure that we're following PMP guidelines on that.
Now, how many states are supposed to be reporting? Is it every single state that veterinarians are having to report? Let's kind of talk about who needs to be worried right now when they're listening to us.
As they're trying to eat their lunch. Oh my gosh, that might be us. So there's actually only currently 17 states that are required to report. It, again, could change at any moment's notice. It's definitely something as we're heading into, the 2010, 2020s, that it's becoming more prevalent that this is an area that should be monitored in veterinary medicine. While you might not be required to right now, that doesn't mean by end of this year, next year, the next 5 years, that your state might have to record and report that to your state. So right now, 17. By the end of this year, who knows?
Exactly. And that's where it's definitely changing fast. And it is just trying to learn and adapt and see as things are changing, how we are needing to adjust and how we're trying to fit that into our workflow to stay up to date, to stay compliant. So, Cass, let's talk about that. What do we need to do if we are having to report? What does reporting look like for veterinary professionals?
I want to say a big pain in the butt, but it doesn't have to be. There are requirements that you have to know and information you have to gather both on drug and on client and patient. So again, I feel like a broken record. It is state dependent. What Washington state requires might be different than what North Carolina requires. So it's really important that people get familiar with their state's dispensing guides and their local agencies or their state agencies on what's required to report to the PMP. So big thing is basically the drug, who it's going to, both client and patient. There's things like date of birth, there's quantity, there's total days dispensed, there's prescription number, refill number, all sorts of stuff that you got to gather. And it doesn't matter if you've got a digital option or you're record keeping on paper, you have to have it somewhere, and then you have to go onto your state website and you've got to report it.
And so reporting is that, am I uploading a file? Am I typing everything in? Am I calling somebody and giving them a detailed account of how my day has gone and what I've dispensed? What are the options for reporting?
Oh man, like any of us have time for more phone calls for sure. So that's what's cool about the online reporting site is they give you options. So you have the option to do an individualized 1-by-1 manual, basically uploading into their software, fill in the required spots and do a manual submission, each single drug that you dispense out. Or they have file upload options. So if you've got a digital controlled logbook or an Excel sheet or somewhere where you can gather all this information and then you can create it, it has to be a DAT file. That looks very confusing when you make it. But that is the file submission. So there's even if you do a file submission, there's certain requirements for what format that file should be in. But it is a lot easier to do the file. I used to do manual and now I do file, and I love it. And I love the software that I use that helps me with that.
Definitely. And that's I have seen the number of fields that we have to fill out if we are doing it manually. And it can seem like maybe like originally you're like, you know what, this might not be that bad. Like I can totally do this. But then it's about like 35, 37 fields of info per drug. Think about how often you're sending GABA out the door, frame it all out the door. How many of those you are having to fill out per drug.
Exactly.
It's a while.
For a smaller clinic that maybe you're doing 1 or 2 a day, that might not be a big deal. But if you're a super busy multi-doctor, huge facility, you could be doing 30, 40, 50 in a day. That could be someone's full-time job, honestly, sitting at that computer doing manual entries.
So definitely want to make sure we're seeing how often we're needing to report. And then you talked about days threshold. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So again, this is not something that every state requires, but there are states who they only require that you do a report after a certain amount of days of medications that you're sending home. So for Washington state, that's a 14-day threshold. So I'll use tramadol, for example, any tramadol that we send out the door, if it's less than a 14-day supply, which means this pet gets 2 tablets a day, we're only sending 7 or 8 days worth, 10 days worth, 14 days worth, whatever it is. I don't have to report that to the state. It's anything over a 14-day supply that they want to know about. So it's kind of, to put it into a little bit of perspective, it's more of those chronic pain. We're sending home numerous refills, things like that, at least for Washington state. And again, that day supply threshold, some states have a shorter threshold. Some days it's, I think North Carolina, you could correct me if I'm wrong, is 2 days on theirs.
2 days threshold for us.
Yeah. So it kind of depends. That's one of the things I will say Washington state's a little bit more lenient is my frequency of reporting, and anything under 14 days, they don't want to know about.
Now, Cass, let's talk about what's all the information that I'm able to grab from a data submission dispenser's guide.
Yes. So table of contents is going to be your best friend because they literally have it organized based on what information you have to collect, what all you have to track, what you have to submit, when you have to submit it, if there's any exemptions, and how to maintain compliance. That's all within your table of contents. So when we're looking through Washington State's right here, something to pay attention to as well is if it's veterinary specific, if there's any veterinary specific sections. So Washington State loves us, and they have literally a veterinary data submission section, and everything that's pertaining to vets is in its own special section, which is so awesome.
And that's where North Carolina does not love us as much, apparently. So, like, mine is not. If I look into our data submissions guide, we do not have things that are completely set apart in our table of contents like Washington does. That's where you can always just come in, Control F, just go in and search vet, and it's going to be able to tell you where it is showing up within that data submission dispenser's guide. So even if it's not completely set apart within your table of contents, you can go in and see exactly where veterinarians are either specifically notated. So if they are going to say, vets are exempt, or vets have a different reporting timeline, or that veterinarians are just not mentioned at all, meaning that it's going to apply to you. It's if you're not specifically exempt, that you're just going to be following those regular reporting guidelines. And Cass, tell me a little bit about zero reporting. What does zero reporting mean? Who needs to do it? What's going on with it?
So yeah, the zero reporting is tricky because you think, oh, I don't dispense controlled substances. None of this applies to me. Big fat wrong. Just because you don't dispense controlled substances does not mean you're not required to report that I did not dispense any controlled substances. So they actually have a section that talks specifically about zero reports, if you're required, and how often you have to submit a zero report. So Washington State, even though I have to report my dispensions quarterly, if I don't dispense anything or my hospital doesn't, we have to report that we didn't dispense anything within 7 days of no dispensing.
And there is also some other weird timelines that we can have too. So let's say, okay, we dispense, we have to report. That's great. We didn't dispense, we may have to do a zero report. What about, do we just need to are there ever instances where we might have to just research in the prescription monitoring program's database and not need to report anything?
Yes. So there is query laws as well. Just because you're like, yep, I don't need to be, I'm not required, or I am, there are actually laws before you even dispense anything. You may have to look up and make sure that that client is not doing what's called vet shopping, right? They didn't go, if you're in a huge town and there's 20 clinics within, a 2-mile radius, that they're not hopping from clinic to clinic with their old arthritic dog getting tons of tramadol. So you might have to research before you can actually dispense and make sure that there's nothing, 2 hours ago, they got it from the clinic up the road.
Mm-hmm. Now, Cass, you were saying that everything can change state to state. So tell me a little bit more about, let's talk about the resources we can use to figure out what each person's specific state needs, is telling them to report. How do they find that information out?
Great question. So aside from reaching out to your local state vet associations, you can actually even look up your state's PMP. VetSnap actually has a really fantastic resource as well on their website that kind of has this information based on your state. You can input. They've got if you're required, how often you have to report, do you have to do zero reporting, thresholds, things like that. They've got kind of all that information already mapped out for you, and links to the resources within your state to get those questions answered. And definitely, if you don't or you've never heard of it, look up your state dispenser's guide and look through that and kind of get familiar and see if veterinarian is looped into there somehow.
Now, finding that data submission dispenser's guide, though, that can sometimes people get a little bit lost when we're talking about that. So
yes,
one, I feel like easiest thing is just Googling your state PMP. Data submission dispenser's guide, because sometimes the states, maybe it's not always called PMP. Is that correct? Depending on the different states.
Yep. So best bet to do is, again, see VetSnap's resources. They're fantastic, but put in Google PMP, PDMP, state dispenser's guide, veterinarian. You could put in any of that stuff and kind of condense it down. Just make dang sure if you're going the Google route that you get the most updated one, because you're going to be able to find a PDF file that has many different versions on it, and they get updated frequently. Like Washington State's just updated February, but if I was to Google Washington State Dispensers Guide, it would show me previous versions also. So make sure you got the most up-to-date one.
Definitely. And so that's where, yeah, if some of you are listening to us and you're like, I literally have never heard of PMP. I've never heard that phrase before. I've never heard this, but I know that we're having to report. And this is where, if you're in California, it is probably called cures. That's what everyone knows. And that's where I get blank stares when I say PMP, but I say cures. And they're like, ooh, there we go. I know what you're talking about now.
Yep.
What is it? Michigan is going to be MAPS. So they have their Michigan automated prescription system. So each state, it may be known by a different little identifier, but it's all going to boil down to that statewide prescription monitoring. Now, Cass, let's finish up. Let's see. Okay, we've briefly kind of touched on VetSnap having the document to be able to learn what your state needs to tell you to do. Let's talk a little bit more about that PMP assistant. Have you used VetSnap's PMP assistant personally?
I'm so glad you asked, because I really wanted to talk about it. Yes, I do. So full disclosure, I use VetSnap. I love it. It's a fantastic product and software platform. And the PMP assistant is life-changing. I mean, I'm not kidding you. I was sitting there, and I do it more often than every 3 months, but I was still sitting there with so many papers that I collected all the information on, and I'd be submitting them one at a time, and it would take hours and hours and hours. And that's if I collected all the right information. That's if none of the papers were missing, because paper can grow legs and walk off. We all know that's happened. And so when VetSnap came out with the PMP assistant, it's so fantastic the way that it can I'm already creating the log entry that I have to create in my record keeping for controlled substances in general. That's already happening within my VetSnap logbook. I can then set it up to be like, yep, this is a dispensed controlled substance. And I click that box, or that box is automatically clicked, and it pulls all the required information with just a few pieces here and there that I have to add in myself. And then I can go and it tells me if there's any information missing before I create it in a file. Do I need to archive it within my logbook and make sure it's good to go and there's no issues or no reconciling that needs done? I can then select the ones that are, ready for submission, and create the file. And then it's keeping track of when I created the file, what all was in the files when I created it. And then if I need to go make any edits and resubmit it, it's keeping track of all of that for me. It's so cool.
And so, y'all, if you're doing either PMP reporting and you're like, hey, I am doing the manual entry right now and it is awful and I hate it. Or if you're like, hey, maybe I am supposed to be reporting and I don't think I ever have before. And, oh yeah, now that you're talking about manual entry, that sounds awful and I don't want to do it. And you want to look into the file upload option. So VetSnap is going to have a PMP assistant specifically for you. So if your state is needing you to report, if you want to make it easier, if you want to look into a digital logbook and make the state reporting easier, we've got you. We've got that all-in-one solution for you. So we can help pull all that information from your practice management software, create that little downloadable file, and you're just uploading it. And you're doing one file for like everything that you've dispensed that day. So it's also not even that I'm having to do a file per drug. I can bulk select everything that got dispensed. We are talking about going from hours down to seconds. Oof, makes it so much easier for everybody. Now, Cass, what are some best practices for doing PMP if someone is, again, they're either struggling with it right now, they want to make it easier, or again, they had no idea what PMP was before they heard us talking about it today. What are some of those best practices? How can they set themselves up for a success? What are your recommendations?
Yes, I highly, highly recommend, at least if you get nothing else out of this, go do a little research. Go find out what actually applies to you. There's great webinars out there that talk about it as well. But if it is required of you, the best thing you can do is to just kind of start where you're at and start figuring out what's actually controlled in your state. What are you dispensing out, and kind of building out that framework. If you're doing paper logbooks, doing manual submissions, and you want an easier option, maybe VetSnap's a really great choice. I obviously love it, but what works for one person might not work for everybody. And then always log controlled drugs in real time. Obviously, PMP requires some of the states require immediate reporting, but it's just a really good habit to get into. The second something leaves your facility, or as you're filling it, you filled it, the owner's waiting up front, just get your log entry done get that done, whether it be VetSnap, you're writing it down, whatever it might be, get it done in real time. That way you're not trying to remember or get caught up and reconcile and other things that come up down the road. So always doing it in real time is definitely a big help. And just making sure that, saying I don't know is not a good excuse, unfortunately. You are required to know. These are really important. And always go back to the why. Why does it matter that I have to report controlled substances? Why do they care where they're going? Why, right? Go back to the why of the importance of why we're doing this, right? And it's important that we are helping in stopping the diversion of controlled substances. It's a huge deal in our nation. And we all know that vet shopping happens, right? They're not just shopping around and getting the best discounts or who has the cheaper pricing. They're also going around. There are bad people in the world, and they go around and they use their poor old dog Betty to go get, controlled substances from different clinics. So just make sure that we're doing our due diligence in helping prevent that diversion.
I know we've talked about a lot of really great resources tonight. Cass, you mentioned webinars, though. Where can they go to get some more webinar knowledge about PMP?
Yes, VetSnap sponsors some great webinars too. So if you go to VetSnap's website, they actually have an education or resources section, and you can find their webinars there. They have some great content speakers. I'm going to toot my own horn. I'm one of them.
I was going to say, are you just going to be like, oh no, there's
I'll just be sly. I'll just
is one of our amazing webinar speakers that does cover PMP. So you definitely can learn more from Cass with a full hour-long webinar that she does on PMP knowledge.
Yep.
If y'all have not joined Cass on a webinar before, definitely head over to vetsnap.com. Look at that useful resources tab. Check out our upcoming educational webinars. Definitely register for hers. They are always going to be virtual through Zoom. They are always free, and you are able to get some great knowledge. So again, we now have a software resource that we were able to do with VetSnap's PMP Assistant. We've got that downloadable template that you're able to get to learn what states' requirements are going to vary. You can do live webinars with Cass, and we even have an on-demand option for you as well, my friends. So you can also always head over to education.vetsnap.com and learn about our PMP state reporting for veterinary professionals and do an on-demand online course. So lots of different ways that we can kind of just grow that knowledge about PMP for veterinary professionals that are kind of just wanting to explore, learn a little bit more, and improve themselves. All right, Cass, thank you so much for joining me today. I think that is all the time that we have today, but I'm loving that we got to dive a little bit deeper into PMP knowledge today.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Courtney. I really appreciate it. It's been fun.
It has been a lot of fun. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us with today's Compliance Bites with VetSnap, where we dove into some PMP knowledge. And again, come back next time you need a compliance snack to learn a little bit more about those bite-sized compliance topics. And definitely hope that you were able to get a snack while you listen today. Thanks for tuning in to Compliance Bites with VetSnap. Still hungry for help? Head on over to vetsnap.com for everything you need to stay compliant with no crumbs left behind.